Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lunch Tech and Chat with your hosts, Will and Andre. So I work with AI. Will works with VC and blockchain. And the idea of this podcast, if you're new here, is we're having lunch, having a chat, and sharing with you guys all the crazy technology stuff that we like and we love to share with you. So today we're going to talk about OpenAI, SearchGPT, Zuckerberg sending notes, talking about open source models, Elon Musk. We're going to talk about stock markets. Nvidia, a lot of little things that we've got in a agenda for today.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So just for everybody that is actually just getting started, so the whole idea of this podcast came from me and Andre being, we've known each other for 10 years? Probably something along those lines. We've actually met through actually our tech involvement in the places of where we worked, and we've been meeting for several weeks, where we just, we have lunch, we talk about crazy stuff, sometimes technology, sometimes a little bit of we touch on the markets, and also societal impacts of the technology as well. I think actually they come very often in our chats. So we decided to host this podcast as a way to say, just share with the world like the crazy conversations that actually we have, because usually those conversations
why not?
Why not? And those conversations have led to a whole bunch of different ideas as well, on both the stuff that we do at work, but also, startup ideas.
Essentially, we're saving the world sitting on the table having lunch.
Exactly. That's the idea. So yeah, I want to hold you for any longer, Andre.
One of the things that I was going to say is, so California, in California, they're trying to pass a new bill for AI. I don't know if you have read or anything on that. So they want to create more regulation about on LLMs and models. There have been a few iterations of this bill, and there are people that are starting to endorse. So I just read that Elon Musk has just endorsed the bill now, like publicly, saying that he does agree that governments do need to be, sort of overseeing and acting on those LLMs.
Actively engaged, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that they have in this bill, and I don't know if it has changed from the last time that I read, but was that if someone creates something harmful using an LLM that was created by a company, of course, that person will be charged. But the idea of the bill is that the creator or the owner of the LLM is responsible as well.
Yeah.
And that touches in all those other conversations of like open source models and Zuckerberg talking about open source models. What's your view on that, Will? Like, do you think that governments need to be involved? Do you think that if someone is using your product, so let's say, for example, if I buy a car and using that car, I create an accident, is the car company responsible for the accident that was created by me driving that car? Isn't that the same as someone using an LLM and creating something harmful? So where does the boundary sit in your view?
Yeah, that's actually I think that's an interesting topic, because, and we covered a little bit, some of it, I think in the last week's conversation. But the fact that someone is using a tool, let's call AI a tool, right? And it's using that for harm. I don't necessarily think that the creator of the tool should be charged, because actually the creator of the tool has, relatively little control, let's say, to try to map out all possible and creative kind of ways of harming, right? Like, if you imagine like in the context of the car, if you imagine the car manufacturer goes and manufactures a car for a specific purpose, right?
Mhm.
And that car is, let's maybe kind of like remove the self-driving cars from the conversation, more like traditional powered engine, powered engine cars. Is specific purpose is
So 2000s.
yeah. So it's kind of like it's just like manufacturing it for a specific purpose, and then selling it on the market.
Mhm.
There are people involved in that value chain
Yeah.
of creating that car and putting from all the way from manufacturing the parts to assembling them actually and putting it to the market. There are, I guess, like quality assurance throughout different stages of the value chain up to the point that actually the car is actually available for the user.
Mm-hmm.
And through the creation of the value chain, all of those different people and manufacturers and contractor manufacturers, etc., they are taking some level of risk, because if the quality assurance doesn't pass, they might actually be excluded, etc., right? But then the user of the car goes on and decides to, say, kill a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Willfully, not by conditions that led to the user, but actually kind of willfully, wakes up in the morning and say like, I'm going to kill a family.
Yeah.
Right? And then takes the car and goes and kills the family. I think that it would be probably challenging to say the contract manufacturer is actually the one that should also go to trial, right? Because the contract the builder, the manufacturer of the car doesn't
have control.
That person will in the morning wake up and say, I'm going to go and kill their family. And so the contract manufacturer, or the manufacturer of the car, he will be able to go and put all different types of checks and quality assurance throughout the manufacturing of the car.
Yeah.
But not on the use of it. The use of it is still the user that is actually sitting behind the wheel and going and actually willfully kind of like, no, I'm going to kill that family.
Yeah.
So it's, so I would say, I don't know how the bill is written, and I haven't read it, but yeah, I think you can maybe create some sorts of like assurance through the process of creating a model, be it open source to closed source, and you have like certain sort of the assurance. But once actually it's out of the hands of the creator, and it is into users' hands, I think it's really challenging actually to say, no, the creator is also responsible for it. I mean, and it's very different. I think even in the car space, you could still say, if there was actually the harm to that family was caused because there was some sort of breakdown, fault in the car, then okay, that's a different conversation, because that means that at some point in the value chain, the manufacturer actually didn't go and actually kind of properly assess the risk of that manufacturing.
I agree with you. I think like a risk framework is required. So having some sort of framework that people evaluate how the LLMs are interacting with the real world, because like stuff like that is, you don't want someone to be using LLM and to know how to build like an atomic bomb or shit like that, right?
Yeah.
So how to break into a house, or, like things that of course are harmful, because it's a straightforward harmful-less analysis, if that word exists. But I think a framework to guarantee quality might be required, and for everything, like even like when we talked about blockchain and things like that, like having regulations and have frameworks in place and quality and bench checks are necessary for the type of community that we live today. And discussion for another podcast of, do we live in the right sort of community, or our ways of living, is that the way that we should be living in government's representation? But that's a different discussion. So I think for the way that we live currently, for the way that things are set up in the world that we are, I think regulations are required to maintain quality and prosperity and, like all that good stuff, the balances. But I think once you say anything that is created using your tool or using your LLM makes you responsible for the outcome as well, that's when innovation gets limited, because people will stop trying to innovate because they're going to have that fear of, if I take something to the next step, what are the things are we not thinking about that can play against our company? And imagine like if someone gets sued by something that they did, and if it's a small company or a small player, they're going to be like, they're going to stop existing on the next day, right?
Yeah.
So that limits innovation, limits the entrance of new players, and it strengthens the big players because they are the ones that have the money to play the game.
Yeah.
So I think that's the problem in my view. And if we think about like open source and things like that, how would you control that? So maybe the bills and the governments, when they're thinking about this, they should think, what is the quality framework we can put in place to test products that are served to end clients? Because then if you're saying, I'm using an open source model in my product, then of course you're responsible that your product is passing the required frameworks of quality of using the LLM or something in those lines. But I think that the way that this bill has been trumpeting right now is too extreme in my view. And I think that would, like I said, limit innovation.
So what is it that in this bill, what is the framing? So like, what is the core of it?
So there's lots of things on it, but I think
like
the principal stuff is around, the oversight, the government oversight on sort of the LLMs and regulations around the usage of LLMs and responses. But I think the trickiest part of that is the responsibility sitting on the creator. And I think maybe on another podcast, if people want, put in the comments if you do, we can probably break down the bill and just talk about the bill in specific. Because this will become news in the next few months and people will be talking about it quite a lot. But that leads us to the next discussion, which is open source. So open source, if we think about LLMs and closed source, let's say, or proprietary LLMs, OpenAI is sort of the biggest one in the market right now. They are leading this industry. They working alongside with the regulators. So we spoke about that in the last podcast, like the positives and negatives of this. So even if we look at the new model, Q-Star or Strawberry, they've already showing and demoing to regulators before any sort of official release or other people getting their hands on it. And that's all in the controlled environment when you have companies behind that are building something that you can sort of control or put things that you can enforce rules into place. When you go into open source, and of course Meta is a little bit different because they are a company and they have responsibilities and they can be regulated. But once you give something open source to the market and the developers take that open source into the next level, create something from scratch, that's when you are completely outside of all the regulation. And that's when, how do you manage that? So in my view, you would manage by the final products, but I don't think we should limit innovation. But talk a little bit about your view, and then talk a little bit about the letter that Zuckerberg has sort of exposed or written.
So Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows him. So this creator of
it's a surfer guy in the US.
The new surfer
the new surfer that has a tan going on with the white ties. Did you see that? He was very tanned, but I think because I don't know if he's doing like fake tan or he's surfing using like shades on, but he looks like really weird. Like his whole face is thin and around the eyes is like very, very pale. Like it's so funny, man.
Maybe he was swimming and he was calling that surfing. I can vouch for his surfing skills. I haven't watched anything around him surfing on all. It was just like maybe a style thing as previously we talked about, like he's changing his style.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, coming back to Zuckerberg. So Zuckerberg actually published, I think it was like last month at some point, a newsletter vouching for the Meta Lama and Lama groups of LLM models, and why they wanted to purposefully go into open source and not leave, not kind of like fall into the temptation of OpenAI and going from being a open source project originally.
And can I just take a tag on that? So don't
ahead.
forget your line of thinking so you can carry on. But it's really interesting. Like Elon Musk, it's always suing and complaining that OpenAI went from an idea of an open source like to a closed company and now for profits, right?
Yeah.
But then if you think about the models that he's creating, like the Grok 2, whatever that fuck is called, he's like, that's not open source. So
it's not. I don't know. I haven't actually I haven't actually looked into Grok models in terms of like actually played with them.
Yeah, they are good actually. They're not bad. They're good. But they trained and they use a lot of Twitter data to train their models. Yeah. But it's interesting that if you complaining that, oh, I funded someone to open this open source that will take us to the future, and then you open or you create a competitor using your tools. And I understand he's trying to make money with Twitter. They invested a lot of money on Twitter, so he needs to show profits and etc.
Yeah.
But why didn't he go down the path of saying, hey, look, because you didn't play my vision, I'll create my vision here. And I'll show that my vision is better than yours. Like, he just followed the same path as OpenAI. Like, I don't know.
maybe it's a bootstrapping phase. I don't know whether that he might actually change that down the line. Actually, Musk is quite well known for changing his mind as time goes on. We'll see about that. But
and promising deadlines that he can
and then promising deadlines he cannot actually deadlines or features into cars and so on that he cannot necessarily meet.
Do you see all the driverless cars on the streets? Carry on. Sorry.
I don't know if anyways, for another conversation we'll talk about self-driving cars maybe in a future in a future conversation. But coming back to Zuckerberg and in his letter. So Zuckerberg actually wrote his letter where he outlines his essentially his vision for Lama and why he thinks that Lama, his group of LLM models that actually Meta is behind and bootstrapping into the market, will eventually win out the AI race. And essentially he starts by comparing LLMs, I mean like AI generally, as a multi-purpose multi-purpose kind of like technology that eventually will be all over the place across different devices, different environments, different, it will be part of everyday life, right?
Google's already doing that, but as part of the Google suite. But I think his view is wider, like anyone can do anything.
It's more kind of like multi-purpose, open kind of like environments, open, multi-platform, etc., right? So he's more thinking along those lines. And he essentially kind of like, he talks about, when he compares really AI to the Unix systems, he's kind of like as the original kind of like reasoning behind Meta. And what he was trying to say is essentially, for those that actually are non-technical, Unix is essentially the basic framework behind
operating
system
like
for
like DOS for Windows is Unix is the DOS for Linux.
it's the DOS for
that's the easiest way of explaining. Not 100% that, but that's the easiest way of explaining.
So operating system for Linux and for also like at the basis of Mac OS for those that actually are Mac users. That then Mac OS actually build on top of it. So, but anyways, so he was actually comparing how Unix evolved over time relative to how he thinks AI is going to evolve over time, and saying that when Linux started using actually the Unix operating system, kind of like a framework to build and to evolve into that, everybody was doing the opposite. Everybody was saying like, this is crazy. We're just create this, closed systems and try to harness as much money, as much value as we can.
Everyone else, meaning Microsoft.
Everybody else, Microsoft, Apple as well, of course, did their own thing with their own operating system, and then eventually, forward into the future, like 30 years. Linux is all over the place. Is even used by, is probably the main operating system actually nowadays used even across Microsoft environments, like through Azure and so on, and virtual machines.
Yeah.
So it's
I don't have any facts on that. But
pretty significant as a server based platform, right? Operating system. So that has grown a lot, and is now all over the show, right? It's
it's just like Android or anything else that you make it open source that people can consume for their own technology.
They can consume for their own technology. So that's the basics of how Zuckerberg is actually playing, and he's saying that anyways, AI or building AI and trying to harness just the value of AI. His point of view is that it's not Facebook's or Meta's business model anyways. That's not what they're trying to do. What they're trying to do is actually use, in the same way that actually people use operating systems for Unix, to build something that has the actual value. And that's why for him,
so it's like he's not interested with the base framework as long as the community and everyone can contribute for that base framework to be even better and grow even faster because everyone's contributing. Exactly. And then you harvest whatever you've created to build your own products, which is what's Meta's objective. That's like they don't want to be an AI company. They want to enable AI for massive consumption.
Exactly, and across the platforms and the tools that they.
Yeah, there's a really stuff in WhatsApp, like you can generate images in WhatsApp. They tried some. It's pretty cool how they do it because they enable features. Like I know there was a feature to create those what do you call them on WhatsApp? Like when you have those little images that you can send to people,
like emojis or like GIFs.
No, it's not GIFs. There's a name, but I'll open my WhatsApp to look. There's but the thing is, they created. Oh yeah, you can use AI to create your own. So you can create your own sticker. Yeah. So you type whatever you want, and then it creates your own sticker. So they are embedding AI on a lot of stuff. Like they've done those AI glasses with Ray-Ban, and they just try to enable as much as they can with AI. Which is pretty cool because they do it. If it doesn't work, they take it offline. They come back, like they experimenting in a live environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's the goal. He doesn't want necessarily to focus on that AI only business model. He wants to bootstrap actually the models and see how eventually it replicates a little bit what Unix systems have been for computing and for operational systems across the globe, where essentially he tries to enable that early revolution and see how fast that early revolution kind of like catches up to existing models. And he makes a point about the fact that if you look at Lama models, right, which actually it started significantly behind some of the models from
They've talked
AI
the chat
so
a few times.
So actually now they actually, like the Llama 3.1 is a 405 billion parameter model. It's huge, right? And they are now actually catching up quite quickly. And he puts that on the fact that it's actually open source, that there is a not only Meta bootstrapping it the same way that they bootstrap open source or the open source frameworks. So for those that actually, developers, I think they did the was it the Vue or one of actually front end models. Well, it's just React. Right? React. Yeah. So they open source actually React, right? And other actually open source models, I think also for data querying and so on, GraphQL and others.
And things that became quite big
and became huge after they have done that initial phase of bootstrapping. And the way that he's looking at AI is looking under like some similar lens where you bootstrap something and then a whole community of builders started like using it because it's open source and they can play and they can build stuff on top of it. And then that creates kind of like a self-reinforcing cycle on its own. And I think maybe coming back a little bit to the regulatory idea that we were talking about before, he touches on that, saying that some companies are trying to ring fence the regulatory and the rules around regulatory because they are playing that similar game that Microsoft and Apple, to an extent, played in the early days of computers, right? Well, they're trying actually to put in the rules because they want to harness the most amount of value out of those closed environments that they built. And actually, his perspective is that by open sourcing it, you're challenge a little bit that modus operandi, in the sense that you're trying to make the users a little bit more accountable for it, and the developers of the open source model to think about what potential harms that some of those models actually are doing, because it's transparent and everybody can actually build on top of it.
But I think there's a fine line between not creating something that is harmful and allowing innovation, and on the other side, not blocking the whole creation and transformation because anything can be harmful. You know what I mean? Like LLM, the way that large language models work, they give you back so you're saying tokens, and you get straight away tokens on something that is most similar to the question that you asked, based on the data that has been trained. So even if we say, it's creating information, it is based on recurring patterns or something that has trained that model. Of course,
simulating intelligence, right?
Yeah, it is in a way, but it's like if you think about how your brain works, and then you have all your synapses, and the synapses, they are sort of excited with electricity every time you think of something. That creates a ramification of connections in your neurons. And then every time you think about that stuff, that's what comes back in your brain. And then you have other parts of your brain that will get that information and transform into something that is more explainable, that you can talk to someone. And we can deep dive into that in some other podcast. But the large language, the LLMs, or the large language models, they are not as complex as our brains right now. Like, they just responding with the token that most matches with the tokens of the question that you're sending.
Based on probability.
Based on probability.
And the training data.
That's why there is bias and all the other stuff that people are trying to fix on the LLMs. And of course, with Strawberry, they're saying that the LLMs take to the next level of, like having the reasoning or more thinking and processing the data like we do. Like if I ask a question, you're not going to take the first thing that comes out of your brain and respond it to me. You're going to think about it.
Yeah.
That's why we stop to think about
sometimes,
it. Yeah.
not always.
Yeah.
If it's very automatic and like
but,
a snap information or judgment about it,
yes,
I might actually answer.
And that's
way.
fine.
Yeah.
And that's LLMs are great for that.
Yeah.
But when you have to actually put thinking on it, that's when LLMs are not good yet. So I think the point is you can't limit innovation, but you have to restrict LLMs becoming harmful, and of course bias and all the other stuff. Like, let's say if I'm using LLM to make decisions of who do I hire for a position at my company, if there is bias, I'm always going to be getting the same type of developers that throughout history were the type of people that worked for that position, right?
But how would it be eliminating necessarily that bias in an LLM itself? Because the thing is, at the end of the day, like taking the HR example that you're just mentioning, right? At the end of the day, the person that is still hiring is still the ultimate person that is going to make the call, right? About hiring or not. And that person does have biases
and let's say,
and so on.
But let's say you are now a company and you say, I'm going to replace my HR by LLMs, right? Let's say you're hiring, I don't know, for doctors. If you take the last 50 years, most of the doctors have been white males or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm making those numbers up.
Like, definitely making that up. We have no statistics to back this up.
Well, let's say that is true, right? And then every time you send your CVs through the LLM, let's say I build a solution that is going to go into someone's LinkedIn, it's going to look for their Facebook page plus their CV and make a decision to give me the top 10 CVs so I can pick from those CVs and hire someone.
Yeah.
Everyone that is outside of that bias will be eliminated in the first step with no human interactions.
Yeah, probably.
So there needs to be regulations to avoid this type of things happening. And I agree, but how do you do that? That's the other question, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it on the system that you build? Is adding reasoning, is adding blockers. It's making sure that when you train your LLM, you're trying to take some of the bias away. There's lots of different ways that you can achieve things like that if you target it to it.
Yeah.
So I think regulations are important to have a framework that is measuring some of those things. But now when you say anything harmful that you create is of responsibility of the LLM, I think that's when the boundaries get passed.
Yeah.
Well, of the LLM, which of course the creators are responsible for it. That's when the boundary gets
so
across.
that's an assumption, right? So that's an assumption based on the fact that a LLM is not a legal person.
Yes.
Which
is
we'll still actually
which
might see regulations
AGIs,
coming around that, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the kind of stuff that I would say now kind of like coming a little bit like to the blockchain world where there has been already cases where they have identified that the NFT or whatever actually the asset could be under some sort of like scrutiny of the law. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that this thing evolves into the future.
Yeah.
Where the agents themselves could be, liable. I don't know how you would actually implement, and that would mean potentially, killing particular instances of the agents. Anyways, we could probably enter into that.
Agents is AGI and agents are really good discussions, and maybe for another podcast, because agents, I know it has been out there for a while, and a while in AI is probably months and not years, but agents have been here, and it's a very big concept that will take more of the stage as we move forward with the technology.
Yeah.
AGI as well is a conversation that some people believe is possible or not, and we can talk about that. But I think on the regulations part, we're sort of on the same page. And that takes us to
I'm not sure I'm actually trying to get there. So that's the thing. So I think at a superset level, we might be on the same kind of like on the same level, but on the granularity in the levels underneath it, I think we are still trying actually to find where is it that we might be on a spectrum.
Agree to disagree.
Agree to but that's completely and I think this should be encouraged, right?
Of course.
Because this sometimes is about kind of like taking the different points of view, that hopefully they have like some facts, about them, and actually kind of like saying, well, is there some world here where we are finding a sweet spot for how regulations and rules and restrictions kind of like come into that space. I think on a superset level, we agree that
something needs to exist.
That there might be something that needs to be put in place. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the fact that there is a government entity or a few number of lawmakers and so on that actually put those things in place. They might actually be the ones kind of like drafting it, but not necessarily kind of like the ones that are kind of like putting that in place and enforcing it from a government standpoint. And also I think we agree on the fact that innovation itself, we don't want to see that innovation being kind of like crushed too early. I think both of us actually are on the same.
And I think
the same line.
I think my other view that I'm not sure if you're on the same page is that the way that society is designed today, that's where lawmakers' intervention is required, because the way that we operate as a society, if we don't have that, it doesn't seem like anything sort of gets not enforced but followed. Like once I feel like in the way, and I keep saying that, in the way that our society is constructed today, and even more like if we think about the Western world, if you don't have regulators, lawmakers regulating and making things work and someone being responsible for something, I feel like nobody gives a fuck. That's how it works.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say it's more like kind of like I would compare that more like with kids in a way, in the sense that kind of like it's more like a schoolyard type of like environment where the kids play around and the teachers actually leave the kids actually play, and then the kids just kind of like invent a new game, say I don't know, throwing balls in the air and then maybe throwing balls at each other. And then everybody's having play, everybody's, having
someone
a laugh.
Gets a rock and
then everyone, and eventually you have like the innovative kid that says like, you know what, that round thing actually doesn't really please to me. I like something that is a little bit harder than that, and, and maybe less round, a little bit more with like hard edges. And I'm going to, instead of like throwing there, I'm going to actually throw actually at people.
Someone.
At that point in time, then you have the teacher, the principal, or whoever is actually surveilling that school.
And that's what I mean.
Kind of saying, hey guys, you can't do that. And then the kid might say,
giving frameworks,
right?
Giving frameworks and boundaries. So if you have the frameworks and boundaries, then you let people know where they can play. But when you create something like that is so abstract as if you harm someone is your fault, that's where the problem relies, because it's abstract enough to create fear to stop innovation.
It is.
That's my point of view.
Yeah, I think, but I think again, I think where maybe we have some spectrum there is whether you think that this necessarily has to be prescribed, if you will, like by, say, like by a super powerful kind of like body that is.
Well, that's how laws work, right?
I know.
That's how you say, don't kill or else you go to jail.
Oh, of course. and they exist there for a reason. But these usually based on some sort of like power level, which is kind of like there's someone here that is actually a power to tell the others that you can't do that and else. else I'm
Something
more
will
powerful
happen.
than you, and you
Yeah.
get punished.
That's how
and then you go-
society
and
works. Our society currently.
It does work like this, but at the same time, our society is actually very based on the individual entrepreneurship and the individual kind of liberties and the individual. And that's what also created actually the society with all the productivity and confidence. If that individual, that school kid in the schoolyard, to put actually the analogy again, if there was not some school kids that were like quite creative in doing those things, then and some other kid that might be a little bit less, harmful, don't take like a big stone like full of edges actually to throw at the others, but actually find, builds a net. Because say like, you know what, I want to have the ball more often than the others. So actually I'm going to build a net. So actually I can actually catch the ball that the other kids actually are not getting, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Our society was also based over the long run on the creativity
problem
of
solving and
right?
creativity.
And you can not necessarily prescribe, I think, laws that will be based on that eventual kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say outliers. I think actually every human is actually kind of
faulty.
Faulty, but faulty in the way that actually is always looking for some way, shape, or form of improving their life in whatever area of work that actually they're involved in. So there was always going to be that aspect, I think, that has driven our society not to be necessarily followers, but actually creators. And I think everybody's is that in the Western society has been extremely good at doing this over the last 500 years.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe a little bit less the years before, but actually in the last 500 years, it's being extremely good at that and encouraging actually that innovation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when it comes to that, I'm not necessarily sure that the power of someone that doesn't know what sorts of creations will come, will eventually become very important, will be out of some of this innovation that we are seeing in front of us.
But you can. I think if you create some sort of framework, you need to enforce things that are basic, right? Like if you think about like religion, right?
Yeah.
If you
don't kill.
No, you think about like
cheat.
the testaments, like
like the mandaments.
The mandaments. Like create things like that, like things that like don't LLMs can't give information of how to harm another human or how to harm yourself, like basic things, and then let people be innovative. And if new problems or concerns arise, then you treat it as it goes because it's a new technology. And the problem is, just talking about new technology, like if we think about hallucination, expectation of LLMs, humans today using LLMs, most people trust that the information that comes from LLMs are 100% accurate,
reliable,
which sometimes is not. Like even like if you're talking to another human like me or yourself, we can hallucinate as well. Like we can say something that we think is true, it might not be. I would
say this podcast is a huge, huge hallucination. Actually,
why do we expect LLMs not to hallucinate? All the data that we gave to the LLMs are hallucination.
Absolutely. So actually, it is hallucination. Do we hallucinate as humans? We definitely do.
Yeah, of course we do.
We're not necessarily kind of like. I mean, humans actually are pretty bad at being statisticians, I would say.
Yeah, and remembering things.
and remembering things that they say.
Yeah.
But that faulty system that we are has created so much innovation for all of us.
Oh yeah,
right?
Of course.
And I think when it comes actually to regulation or kind of some sort of like rules and restrictions, I would say it's much more about kind of like providing some principles rather than actually saying prescribing in the way that
you create principles that if they are broken, then some consequence can happen.
Yeah, and then you go like through more like if you will, like an English-based law system, where then something becomes really harmful, goes through the courts or whatnot, and then actually based on the acts of the courts over time, we find some sort of balance rather than creating something that is very much like a civil law-based system that you have in places like the United States. You have that in Brazil, and you have that in France and a few other societies where it's like a prescribed, you cannot do this, or you cannot do this, and it tries to categorize upfront all the possible
you can't do
infractions.
that,
And I
because
think that's where
know.
the line.
You're never gonna know what all the things are. Just before we wrap up, there was a little bit of a movement in the market. Nvidia going down, all the stocks dipping a little bit. It's probably gonna recover in the next few days. By the sounds of it. But talk a little bit about. I know you've been following the market. We were just talking about that before the podcast. So what's happening with Nvidia?
So in the market there's a way of thinking sometimes about how things move in the market, and I like to. I've heard this this investor and strategists talking about what we call level and change, right? And level is like how we follow the market and the trends in the market, and the and what is the kind of like index, the expectations of the market. And change is what happens when essentially some of those expectations actually are broken.
Not met.
Right? And sometimes level and change might be kind of what moves the market most of the time is much more change than level, right? So bringing that to the Nvidia like stock more specifically, even though I don't like necessarily actually to comment on individual stocks, but just for the sake of the argument,
only 90% of the market and not be a monopoly somehow. Let's talk about Nvidia.
So Nvidia here. So for those that actually have followed, so they've published recently. There was actually a report on their earnings that came out, and it's still kind of really reasonable.
133%, I think.
Yeah, so above 100%. They've been generating cash flow. Demand is still strong for for the manufacturing of the different machines that are used for AI, etc. So this is doing great, right? And I think so. From a level perspective, things haven't necessarily changed from where they were in the direction of the trend. What has changed, though, is the narrative around the change. Is the fact that the acceleration that we have seen earlier in the year is not as fast.
Yeah, of course it's not.
But nothing actually remains fast.
But then investors create those crazy expectations.
From investors, which is saying like, investors now creating expectations of four digits, right? Like in the thousands of percent and so on, which is of course unrealistic. But because of the whole hype around AI, they say like, well, this is going to carry on forever. Nothing carries on. That's the rule number one of any markets. Is nothing carries on forever at a level, right? And Nvidia is still experiencing extreme, good demand and so on. But the change was it's not accelerating as fast as we expected. Therefore, we're going to punch them because we expected, I don't know, maybe 300% of growth within that time period. And it's just 150% or whatever the exact number is. It's huge.
What I'm bitching right now is that other companies like chip creators like Intel or AMD, they are trying to get into this race, and they're seeing how fast Nvidia has grown, how big this market is becoming. So I'm not a financial advisor, but my bet are on those companies because they need to recover some of the space in the market share. The market share that they had in this market. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I think for sure there is actually that part of the of the narrative that is actually that might play as well. One other thing that is actually quite clear is that the demand for the AI chips that actually are produced by NVIDIA, they also been coming actually from a lot of like overseas markets. So there's actually some market observers that actually are following that demand across, Asia and Pacific in different countries, especially China and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, they have
like
restrictions on what they can sell to some of the
exactly. So I think they're kind of like observing whether the whether that will impact, whether that will impact the eventual demand for NVIDIA because of the restrictions that you have on people that actually are using AI. For example, inside China, but the market generally thinks that what's going to happen is that eventually, Chinese companies will just adapt to it because they don't want actually to stay behind the race for producing solutions actually using the AI. So they eventually just kind of like remove potentially some of those restrictions. At least that's kind of like the headline.
All right. So generated with my AI here. A summary from our chat today. In the world of AI, it's quite a bizarre jam. With LLM regulation that is so 2000s, man. Self-driving car cruising, no need for a hand. But quality assurance, well, it's on demand. Elon Musk endorsing Kali's AI bill, while Zuck's open sourcing catching waves with a drill. His funny tan from surfing, oh, what a sight. But Elon missed deadlines? That's just oblige. Zuck's Lamas out there, open source with glee. To win the AI race? Hey, just agree to disagree. With WhatsApp stickers and React boots aplenty, while NVIDIA market drops, but is up 133%. Restrictions to China, selling chips on the edge. Agents liable, AGI might just be pledge. In school, kids create, but harm needs a fix. Teachers setting principles with some mandament tricks.
That's amazing. What a great way to finish up this chat.
Yeah, thanks everyone.